Hello, good evening, everybody. We are just waiting for others to join in. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, Divya, by the time others join, if I have a query, can I ask Dr. Shashida?
Not right now. You can send us a message and we will address to it each question one by one. So because we have a limited time, so we will wait for that.
अंदर से कुछ लग रहा है?
Good evening, everybody. We are just waiting for a few more people to join. So thank you for joining in. Thank you for your patience. Good evening, everybody. My name is Divya. We are from the team Serving for Humanity. Today, thanks for joining in. Today, we have with us Dr. Shashidhar, who is a senior consultant and head of the department ENT and head and neck surgery at Artemis Hospital. Today, our main focus of discussion would be medical treatment of COVID. Any questions you have, please write it on the box and we shall revert to it. Because of lack of time, if we are not able to answer, we shall take the query later. Dr. Shashidhar?
Hi, very good evening. Just a second. Yeah, I'm glad all of you have joined and thank you for giving your time. So the discussion is on the medical treatment of coronavirus infection. And I'll just share my slides here. If there are 15 people, actually, we can have it like a discussion. There are not many people, so yeah, we can actually anyone.
Doctor, people are joining in, so yes, we can have it as a discussion also.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining in.
So this is probably the most important part of the slide, that the actual fight is between the virus and your body's immunity. And as a patient, you and me are both bystanders, as in we have very little much things to offer or do. And most of it is the virus and the immunity. Now, how the virus damages is dependent on the strain of the virus and also the quantum of virus, how much virus you have got yourself into. And how much damage will happen depends on your immunity. If your immunity is good and it eliminates the virus within first 5 to 7 days, you have a very little damage. And if your immunity is not very good, it takes time to eliminate it. And then at a later point of time, the immunity overreacts, maybe around 10th day onwards. And then the most of the damage happens. So children, they have an excellent immunity, which have what we call as a NK cell based immunity or natural killer cells. So they don't form too many antibodies. When the virus gets into the child, even as young as 3 years old or 4 years old, it just sees the virus and the cells of the immune organs, mostly the macrophages and the T cells, natural killer cells. They go and just eat up the virus. They don't even question that, your friend or foe or whatever it is. And they probably chew the whole viral infection in 3 to 4 days. As we get older, our immune system gets very refined, very mature, and then we go into something called an innate immunity and an adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity means whenever there's an infection, your body examines the infection and then sees how to beat the infection. And then it will find antigens in the virus. And then your immunity will make the antibodies for those antigens so that later it can kill the infection and also give you a long-term protection, like protection for many years. Whereas children's immunity, they don't really waste too much of time in trying to make a long-term immunity. That happens eventually, but it's a very, very aggressive infection. And that's why you will almost never hear a case that child is requiring a oxygen support. You'll never hear a case that child is requiring ventilatory support or a hospitalization. They have other issues, which is called MISC, which happens later. But yes, God willingly, they do pretty well. Now, if you see what happens in the whole phase, from the day you get infected, it will take at least 2 to 11 days and most commonly 4 days, what we call as incubation period, during which the virus is multiplying. And if you are vaccinated, this incubation period is actually very variable. And if you have very good immunity, as in even if you get infected, your body will kill the virus in the incubation period and you may not even get an infection. And if your viral load, as in the exposure from the other person is very high, the incubation period is actually very less. That happens when you're in a very, very close contact with the infected patient. For suppose even some medical personnel who have done CPR on patients without any protection, if they get an infection, it's actually a very less incubation period. And then around 5th day, the symptoms come, which is the most characteristic is actually the headache, which is there in 80% of people. Then fever, everybody knows, body pains, myalgia. The most distinctive, which is as good as doing an RT-PCR, is loss of smell. If you have a viral infection with a loss of smell, that's almost always a COVID virus in today's time. And then the fever keeps coming, going, keeps coming, going, and then the cough starts, and then you're entering the pulmonary phase. And here the most dreaded things happen. And as the pulmonary phase progresses, it worsens, and then you get a late pulmonary phase where the person is oxygen dependent, either is on a ventilator and hardly any improvement is seen. Slowly they get secondary infections with bacteria, fungus, and then they don't make it. So you can have medicines at all the different steps. You can have medicines in the phase of incubation period. You can have medicines at the time of symptomatic, pulmonary phase, and late pulmonary phase. Now, most of the medications which you're using are actually antibiotics. A standard prescription is azithromycin or a doxycycline, and it probably has a very, very limited or no role at all in the incubation period or in the symptomatic phase. But they definitely have a good response in pulmonary phase because secondary bacterial infection is happening here. So if at all you want to take an antibiotic, it's actually after 5-7 days, not in exactly the first 5 days.
Doctor, if you can speak a little louder, please. Your volume is a little low. Sorry for
Okay,
the interruption.
am I audible now? Yeah, is this okay?
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
you are very, very clear.
Okay,
Yeah, clear.
so we had a very good response on HCQS, hydroxychloroquine. And anybody who had treated COVID right from the beginning would actually swear by last year's HCQS that it used to work really well. However, there came a conflicting data and some said it is causing more harm and other things. And then it went out in disrepute. So we don't use HCQS now in present scenario here in the first to fifth days. But there are places where HCQS can be used as per the government guidelines, even in today's real thing. Most commonly used medication is now ivermectin. And WHO has a different say on it, and I'll come to that on later. This is the place where steroids should be strictly avoided. As in, when there is a viral replication, if you are using steroids, you are saying your own immunity, please stand by. Immunity is suppressed by steroids and the viral replication goes on. Steroids have the biggest advantage of suppressing the symptoms. It takes off fever in like minutes to hours. It makes you breathing better. So if you give steroids at any stage of disease, people will actually feel better. It doesn't mean they're getting cured. So if you're using steroids in incubation or in the symptomatic phase, you are asking for trouble. And this is what most of the people do it, whom we have seen when they land up in the ICU, they have used their friend's WhatsApp prescription or some prescription somewhere, or their sister or brother had it in the house and they start medicating themselves, saying, okay, this is easy, I can just start medication even without even having any symptoms. And that's a very dangerous trend to do it. Uh, Now, the other medication, which is called remdesivir, and there's a huge controversy on it, it works or not. Let me tell you that every single VIP which I know who got admitted in Medanta or in our hospital or in Fortis, they all received remdesivir. Whatever the government may say, it may work, it may not. They definitely got remdesivir. That I can tell you right on the face. And it works if you are giving it within 9 to 10 days. So the secret here is if you are a high risk patient, you are overweight, you have a uncontrolled diabetes, even if your oxygen is not very down, maybe about 96, 97, and then you take a remdesivir injection, it definitely helps in cutting down the viral replication. And the other two stages are better when you use this. So for us, remdesivir and ivermectin and Fabiflu is the third antiviral drug which is used. Now, Fabiflu is used very, very commonly, and the data for Fabiflu is not very good. As in, it is not like a clear-cut proven medication that it works. And the cases where it got approval from the government hardly had about 40-50 cases or anything. So most of the trials where they said Fabiflu is working, they actually use steroids with it. So nobody can say it was the work of steroids or the Fabiflu which benefited the patients. But either way, the common sense says that if you are going to use Fabiflu, you have to use it in the first 3 days of the symptoms. In my own experience, the best response actually comes with Fabiflu if suppose the husband is infected or the wife is infected. and the person next to her, they're in the same room and sleeping together, and there has a high chance that the person may develop symptoms in 1 or 2 days. The non-symptomatic person, if they start Fabiflu, it has actually a very good response. But if on day 7 or day 8 you start a Fabiflu, it really doesn't help much. That's for sure. So ivermectin is one of the cheapest and the easiest drug. We'll come to that. Uh, Remdesivir is only given in the hospital setting. And the problem with us is when the hospitals were very congested, we could not admit patients who were not symptomatic, as in who did not require oxygen. So to get admitted, actually, you really need to have more than 95, less than 95 oxygen saturation, breathlessness, and so many things. That usually starts around 8 to 12th day. So the criteria where they said actually it should be used for moderate to severe disease, it actually manifests on 12th day when the remdesivir is not useful at all. So if the hospitals are not decongested, they would actually take high risk patients and they could give remdesivir earlier in the time duration it works. That is about 3 to 6 days. Now, the question here is, does everybody need remdesivir? Absolutely not. And we know that about 85% people, irrespective you give medicines or not, they'll do all right. They may have fever here and there, weakness, but they will turn around, and even without any medication, they can actually be cured. But 15% of patients will go sick, will require hospitalization or oxygen need. And it's impossible to tell who is that 15% people and who are the 85% people who are going to get cured. So that actually complicates the issue because uh, whom you have to use the injection is now put it in a way that if you are very high risk and you're getting sick, you should get it rather than every person should get an injection of remdesivir. So that is the government policy here to prevent everybody from getting a remdesivir injection, because if they just say use it in the viral phase, then everybody would feel like, why should I go and get a severe disease? Might as well take remdesivir and be all right on 3rd day, 5th day. Okay, now steroids are usually used in this period from maybe about 7th day onwards. Best time would be to actually push it to 11th day if the patient condition permits. And if you do not have decreased oxygen, you do not need steroids. That's the dictum. It should not be used just, CRP is high or the fever is not breaking. That's a loose indication. I'm not saying it's a bad indication, but that's a loose indication. And it is best left on to the doctor to decide if the patient really requires it. Because sometimes they do progress into severe pneumonia if you don't give steroids. So, yeah, but definitely, uh, should not be given the first 1 week of the illness. Try to push it as much as you can. But steroids can be given as inhalers and nebulization as early as in the first week. And these are two of the inhalers. One is a budesonide inhaler or a cyclosinide inhaler, and other is in the nebulization form. There is good evidence that if you take inhalers in the early phase of disease, the chances of you getting severe pneumonia is reduced by 70 to 80%. So we now actually advocate almost all the people who are, except for children and very young adults, to have nebulizations or inhalers in the early phase of disease, possibly around 4th or 5th day onwards, not on the first day itself. Another problem with the steroids is they increase the fungal growth. So when you use steroids, you have to rinse your mouth for a few minutes. Otherwise, you can have fungal depositions on the mouth and cheeks and other things. What the media now calls it white fungus. And this is actually much more common than the black fungus. Also is required is to do exercises when you're in the early phase with incentive spirometry, where you keep blowing through this small gadget, and you have to see how many balls you can raise with blowing this. Coming to the ivermectin, the clarity is not there how many days it should be taken. When we take it for prophylaxis, as if I'm working in a COVID ward, we kind of take it every week for many months. And there is some data to say it works in a very good way as a prophylaxis to prevent you from having corona. But most of the people give it for 3 days. A lot of people give it for 5 days, and very few people will give it for as long as the fever breaks in. The only side effect is some people may be allergic, or it may cause gastritis, diarrhea, and other symptoms. But it is well tolerated by most of the people, and it's contraindicated in breastfeeding in the pregnant population. Now, what just happened here was there were almost 28 to 35 trials which went and said ivermectin works, and there is 68% reduction of deaths in that. And then WHO looked at it and it was excited and everything. And then WHO said, okay, let us analyze that thing. And then it gave its interim report on 18th Jan, where it said, yeah, it is exciting and we should get more data for it to, conclusively prove that ivermectin works. And that was the 18th Jan. Now, sadly, a lot of things are at stake. It's a very cheap medicine. It's a generic. Anybody can produce. Nobody has a patent on this. So there's a lot of politics for large pharmaceutical companies to dissuade cheaper drugs. And then most recent analysis, which was in March, WHO, out of the 35 trials, cherry-picked only 4 trials and said, hey, some trials work, some does not. There is a very high risk of bias. And so this, although on paper it looks like it has a 72% reduction, but I think, there's a lot of uncertainty, and it kind of gave a report that it should not be used because it's still not proven. To an extent that the media and the pharma giants and everything, even big giants like Merck's, who produce ivermectin, but they have their expensive medicines like tocilizumab and this and so many other monoclonal antibodies, which cost like lakhs on the stake. They went ahead and said it does not work. So, but the good news is Government of India is actually endorsed it in their management that ivermectin works. So if you're in India, you get ivermectin, but if you're in US or UK or any other country, you cannot use ivermectin for treating COVID. That's the sad part. Luckily in India, we are okay with ivermectin. So how in home you can see what sort of your symptoms are. These are the few things. You have mild symptoms if your oxygen is more than 95 and your breathing rate is less than 24, and you get fever on and off. Chest X-ray is not done, but yeah, that's one of the things to say at home setting. And for moderate and severe, this is the criteria we say. Now, actually, anyone who is not in the mild disease should be treated in the hospital setting. There is no question about it. But we all saw this time when, moderate and even severe patients were getting treated at home. Luckily, the situation is much better. And I really, it pains my heart to see everybody had to learn how to give oxygen, and, almost all of them had become half doctors because there were no beds. But except for mild, everybody else should go to hospitals. There is absolutely no question on that. Now, this is a very dangerous slide. I'm saying this because when the doctor orders you a list of tests, you go through it and there are numbers which you don't know why they are high or other things, and everybody freaks out. CRP itna high ja raha hai, ye ja raha hai, ferritin ja raha hai, D damage ja raha hai. And even honestly, we don't even know what these numbers are. I have patients whose LDH has gone 1000, whose CRP is in 250, and they're doing just fine. Maybe fever here and there and weakness. And I have a patient whose CRP is 15 and their oxygen is in 90s, early 90s, 91, 92 and everything. Right now, we don't exactly understand how these numbers play. Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. But last year, there was some sense in these numbers, as in the CRP and ferritin and everything were rising up together. Some were coming down, and the treatment response was very predictable. But in this particular strain, what is happening is these numbers are elevated as early as third or fifth day, seventh day, which kind of makes the physician and the patient both nervous, very nervous, and there's a tendency to start steroids. Well, I still leave the judgment to the physician themselves to start steroids or not. But bottom line here is a bad number may not always mean bad news. That's the take home message कि अगर आपका बहुत high number है तो it doesn't mean कि all हमेशा बुरा ही होगा, because some patients can actually have poor numbers but they may not clinically deteriorate at all. Now what is happening is there is certain common characteristic of COVID virus with coronavirus with HIV. And this is the reason why we were all thinking it is made in Wuhan lab rather than actually a coincidence from zoonotic transmission outside. Is that if you see here, this is the lymphocyte count. This virus actually suppresses your immunity. So your total counts are all right. Everything is okay. It is 14,000. But the cells which are battling the infection are called the T cells, T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. They are fighting the infection, and the count here is extremely reduced here. So basically you're immunosuppressed, as in something has happened and your immunity is gone for a toss. Now on top of this, if you take steroids, which we have to for certain patients, it just worsens the situation. So how should we monitor it? That's a very important thing. It's not when you want to, it's actually there's a schedule. So BP, respiratory rate, oxygen should be done every 6 hours if you're mild, if you're moderate, and if you're severe, it is done continuously, and all those there's a schedule for that. Blood test should be done if they are stable every 3 to 4 days, but if they're increasing or decreasing, they should be done daily. If they're in a very serious numbers, they should be done daily. Just a second. And then there's also a very important part of the treatment, which is anticoagulation. Because the tendency of the disease is to clot blood vessels in your lungs, in your brain, in your heart. So we give blood thinners, and these are the different dosages and other medications we use. So as a rule, anybody who's more than 40 years should take is Ecosprin, irrespective of any diabetes or hypertension or any disease. He has it or he doesn't have it. And people less than 40 do not need blood thinners while getting treated COVID. Now, this you should remember because a lot of people tend to ask steroid कितना लेना है, कहाँ लेना है, मतलब chemist के पास advice लेने सब चले जाते हैं, and that's it. It should not be used in people who are asymptomatic, who have symptoms within 7 days, low CT score, and when they're in the viremia phase. Viremia phase is they have normal CRP and CT scan, but fever is coming high. Just to break the fever, steroids should not be used because it will prolong your immunosuppression. You will not clear the virus for many, many weeks, and the disease will go on for months. So, last year when people had COVID, by 14 day, almost everybody had a negative RT-PCR. Now, if you see 20 days, 25 days, 30 days, 45 days, they're still RT-PCR positive. So much so that, government has said before 20 days, you can't even get a repeat RT-PCR done unless you're lying to the government in the form. So that's the problem which is there with the new strain, that it is very aggressive, stays for much longer time, which is complicated by use of steroids early. Now this is a AIMS protocol here, but what I wanted to say is uh, they usually ask you to take antipyretics, which is for breaking the fever. They say naproxen is a better medication than dolo or crocin. Because it has anti-inflammatory effect. It also says that you should use a nebulization or a puff, steroid puff, and it says you should use ivermectin for mild cases. Other ones is a different protocol. Now, the other drugs which actually work similar to ivermectin is Nisonide. It is given every 6 hours. I am a big fan of Nisonide. I really use ivermectin unless it's a very simple case. Then there's another antidepressant called fluvoxamine, and where vitamin D is also used. Now, two common problems which will happen to when the reports are looking bad, patient is looking all right. Then what do you do? Like this, see the CT chest here. This one is actually a pneumonia case on the right, and the left is actually a ground glass appearance. It's like a viral pneumonia, very, very mild. But when you see the CT report score, they will both be same, maybe about 7 or 8 on the CT score. But this guy is in deep trouble. He's pretty okay. So, we are not treating the CT score here. So even if the reports are bad, like this person, you need to give him a lot of antibiotics. You need to give him anticoagulation and possibly get him admitted. But with this, although he has a CT score of 10, you'll probably do nothing about it. So you should take the reports in the context of the patient, not as a report individually, because a lot of people have this habit of not consulting doctors and they send the WhatsApp report. Ki, my CT report is this, what should I be doing? And that's absolutely a big mistake. It has to be, the doctor has to understand what position, how was the disease progression to you, for you, and what is the status with all the medication you are in, and then recommend, rather than actually treating the CT scan, because that will make a lot of errors. Now, the other issue is most of the reports are all right, but the fever keeps coming. It's been 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you're still feeling weak, and the fever keeps coming. Now, this is a slightly complicated scenario. Why? Because we need to investigate this. Sometimes there are secondary bacterial infections. Sometimes there are blood clots in the body. Sometimes, there are fungal infections going on. Sometimes a virus is still persisting inside. So this you should definitely consult a doctor, because maybe about 2 out of 5 cases need some sort of treatment here, where the blood reports are all right, but patient just doesn't feel all right. Fever is coming, going. You have to go back to your doctor and say, hey, why don't you reevaluate me if there's something else needs to be done or something else needs to be investigated. So this is like a huge prescription when it comes. There is Gilead, there is Mucinex tablet, which thins your mucus. There is a blood thinner. Then there is an antiviral here. Then there is a probiotic, because we are messing up with your gut. We have to replace the good bacteria in the gut. You may get diarrhea. You will get gastritis. So the list is like a huge, big one. But honestly, not everybody requires this huge list. Sometimes just a plain naproxen on and off will just do the job. And we are over treating a lot of people because we are scared. We just don't have the information to know exactly who will worsen on day 5 onwards and who will really have a severe pneumonia. So till we figure out, which is maybe about 3 to 6 months more, we are kind of, covering you very broadly with a lot of things, from little from Ayurvedic, little from nebulizations, little from mucolytics, blood thinners, and everything. But clearly, not every person requires a blood thinner. Not every person requires steroid inhalation or oral steroids. But I think we will get there. We have enough research publications coming in and other things. And actually, we may have good therapeutics like there are monoclonal antibodies. You're all running here and there for, convalescent plasma, but all this plasma neutralizing antibodies can be created in the lab and given a patient as a subcutaneous injection. So the trials have already been finished. Maybe in a month's time, somebody who's getting moderate disease on day 4th or 5th can be just given a shot of plasma rather than looking for blood donors and everything. And government has approved those medications. They're in US right now, but Roche is bringing it to India maybe in about 1.5 months. So the number of people who actually would die with the disease would dramatically reduce with better treatment. That is for sure. We are getting new brand of antivirals, molnupiravir, and few other things. So the treatment in next 6 months is definitely going to be much better than what we have today. These are the usual blood tests which needs to be chased, and you have to do your oxygen monitoring. Okay, now come to this black fungus thing. This is we have a lot of cases in Gurgaon here. Eye swelling, facial swelling after COVID, or a dental pain or a jaw pain. Yeah, definitely don't ignore it. And like I said, all of these patients will have a very common finding here, that the lymphocyte count is very, very low. This is like 8.8 here. And the upper patient did not have, this patient did not have a black fungus, because although there was an eye swelling, his immunity took care of it because he had a lymphocyte count of 17. The other one, the lady, she got it. So that's the thing. So your lymphocyte count will determine what are the chances and the severity of the infection, which are, if you had COVID and
Just
your
to interrupt
lymphocyte.
here, what is black fungus? Many people don't know.
So black fungus is, my colleague and my good friend Manish Munjal, he works in Gangaram. When he said mucormycosis and he said rhinocerebral mucormycosis, the reporter, they did not understand it. So then he said, it's a fungus which looks black. And then suddenly the reporter pushed it as a black fungus. And that was the first publication which came a month back. And then it went viral, the term black fungus. Medically, there's nothing called black fungus. There are certain black fungus which were species which had melanin production, but as a medical grade, we don't have a term called black fungus. It's called mucormycosis, and the fungus name is called Rhizopus. And this is there everywhere. It is there right in my nose. It's there in Divya's nose. It's there in all the people who are there. But your immunity is very good in tackling it. And uh, on a daily basis, our immunity make sure that the spores, it comes from seeds, and these seeds are called spores, that the spores are not swollen up and they don't hatch into fungus. They're kept in check by the immunity. If you're breathing air, you may have rhizopus in the nose. We only used to see this black fungus in our ICU sick patients who are transplantation, liver transplant, bone marrow transplant, or kidney transplant, and they have zero immunity because they're on steroids and immunosuppressive drugs. And maybe about 8 to 10 cases a year I used to see them. But now, with the same thing which is happening here, that the virus is very aggressive and it keeps your immune system suppressed for a very long time, with lymphocyte count going really low. You see it as early as 2 to 3 weeks after the onset of COVID. And more common in people who are diabetes, extremely common in people who are diabetes. In fact, almost 80% people will have diabetes for sure. or they were in pre-diabetes. They never knew that they had pre-diabetes. They never got that themselves blood tested. Just because they looked healthy, they thought they were healthy. They are the ones who get this. So even when you're not having COVID or anything, it's a good idea to have your blood test checked at least every 3 to 6 months to say if you're in pre-diabetes. So oxygen requirement and black fungus is not proven. It's not, every patient in our ICU receives oxygen, even before the COVID. It, and we never had high incidence of mucormycosis. But, there is so much going around that industrial oxygen, this and that, but none of that is proven actually. But what is proven is steroid use will definitely cause a higher chance of mucormycosis. So if you are taking steroids, it has to be monitored. The sugar levels have to be monitored very closely. And you should cover yourself with a prophylactic antibody and antibiotic and antifungals during that time. And also get yourself examined by an ENT specialist as early when you recover from the COVID to say that, there is no black fungus or no infection in the nose. Now, every patient need not come to an ENT. Let me be very clear on that. If you have a nasal stuffiness, sometimes bleeding from the nose, headache, and that headache is usually behind the eye, retroorbital headache. And these are the ones who actually need to be seen by the ENT doctor nearest to you. After you recover from the COVID, if you have received steroids or you have diabetes. If you have a normal COVID course where you never had diabetes, you never received steroids, your chance of getting black fungus is virtually zero, virtually zero. Let me be very clear on this. But there is a group here that people actually have fungal sinusitis. They have fungus which is creating sinusitis. And when they have COVID, the fungal sinusitis worsens. And they get a similar to black fungus infection called invasive fungal sinusitis, which is also destructive, causes eye swelling and everything. So if you had a pre-existing sinusitis and other things, and you had COVID, even then you should actually also get yourself checked once to see if you're all right. And it can happen anywhere actually. So yeah, the culprit here is the steroids and uncontrolled diabetes. So even this looking teeth, once you open up, you see the whole bone has been eaten up by the fungus. So it's one of those things that, a pain in the teeth and jaws should not be taken lightly when after the COVID. It can really worsen. And once you put an endoscope, this is a normal pink, healthy skin of the nose. And they get bluish patches here in the nose. And, once we see inside, like this one, I've put it here, there is ulceration here, which we send for biopsy, which confirms that it is black fungus. So not every black fungus will have black color here, but a lot of them will actually, after a few days, will become black here, and then we call it like a black fungus. Now, one thing good has happened is 3 weeks back when we were getting these cases, we were getting people who have gone blind. The fungus has gone into the brain, and they are in the most complicated stage. But now the new cases which are coming are actually limited disease, less of disease, because media here has done a good job in educating everyone. And, a fear factor has also played in patients' mind that, even with the slightest symptoms, people are coming to us. And that's a good news. That's really a good news, because what you do as in a surgery is much limited. As in here, just this part of the turbinate and little of the sinus can be done. Whereas this one, which is like progress to a larger one, will actually require removal of the whole jawbone, as in the whole cheekbone, which is called the maxilla, with or without the removal of the eye. So which is quite gruesome. And I just had a message from one of the members here is black fungus is never detected on the blood test. Do not waste your money and time trying to detect. There's a galactomycin antibody test. It is not for black fungus, it is for aspergillus. And if that is normal, it doesn't mean you have a black. So it has absolutely no meaning at all to, if you're trying to diagnose it sitting at home without visiting the doctor with a blood test, you're just wasting your time. It is not detected by the eye checkup. It's in the late phase by the eye checkup. But if you have even the slightest eye issue, blurring of vision, pain in the eye, you should immediately go to the eye specialist. It is not detected early on a CT scan. Black fungus is not detected early in a CT scan. It requires an MRI scan, which is another 10,000 for you. So the easiest thing is go see an ENT specialist, let them put a camera in the nose and see it. So by the time, see, this is as early as anything. Even the MRI will not pick up this disease. Even the CT scan will not pick up, neither the blood test. So the easiest way to do it is that. But on the other hand, you do not have most of the risk factors and your symptoms are just little bit pain and other thing. You can wait and watch. It doesn't mean that you have to rush to the doctor for every pain on the face. So before COVID, you have to be crazy about your blood sugars, BP, and other comorbidities. During the COVID, you have to be extremely careful. And at least 6 weeks after COVID, you have to monitor your blood tests because this is the time you are most vulnerable to get secondary infections, whether it's sinus or urine or in the blood, you can get it. So even after that, you have to monitor it. Yeah, that would be all. Thank you. Now I'll take questions if you have.
Thank you. Anybody wants to ask any questions? You're open to ask questions one by one, please.
Yeah, Dr.
Yes, Mr. Minocha. Yeah.
Excellent presentation, and my compliments to all the doctors, nurses, and for doing such a wonderful job. My question is, there's so much of information whether steaming, just as a precautionary measure. I'm not talking of anybody who's asymptomatic. Does it help in immunity or avoiding COVID? That's one question I have. In terms of, does it help steaming?
That's an excellent question.
Different information is floating all over media, and we are very confused that will it help or not.
See, that's an excellent question. I used to work for 4 years in Medanta from 2009 and 13. And I had this friend called Geeta Krishnan, who is the head of the Ayush department, Ayurveda in WHO. He is posted now in Geneva. And we used to be very good friends. So all those patients who did not want to get a surgery done by me for sinus or other thing, I used to send him to him for Ayurvedic treatment because there's a Ayurveda ward in Medanta. And he used to give steams on and off. Every day he would just put a pressure cooker and give steams and everything. So there are certain patients who really improve and do well because it is a moisture, and it, thins the mucosa and clears the nasal passages. But if you overdo it, it will burn the lungs and it will cause more problems. So steaming 3 to 5 minutes twice a day, even for a routine person, is a very good habit. And absolutely, someone who has a sinus issue or other thing, I would say definitely if it works for you, do it. More than steaming, if you're really keen for the nose, it's called Jalneti, where we clean the sinuses with water. And now, for us as an ENT surgeon, all my patients will get a Jalneti, and it's done with a naso wash kit करके आता है. It's with the Cipla. So it's a water bottle जिसमें आप थोड़ा नमक वगैरह डाल के, you just put it in the nose and rinse it. So it's just, the old principles, but in a more easy and comfortable way rather than using a lota and other things. But anything which cleans the nose with water is a good thing. That's the fundamental thing. So gel neti is much more effective than steam. But what people overdo is they have a sinus problem, they have an infection or other thing, and they're fixated to fix it. They've decided that only steam will cure it, and they keep doing it 4, 5, 6 times. They even have rashes on their face. Still, they keep doing it again and again. So if it's not working for twice a day steam, it will not work for 10 times a day with steam. That's for sure. Then it has to be consulted. As a routine nasal hygiene, steam is excellent.
Thank you.
Any
Just
other
one,
question?
yeah, one more small question I have. A lot of us have already taken these various vaccinations and second dose also. And is there any need to take any kind of supplements to increase the immunity?
Okay, that's an excellent question. So see, the debate here is the duration. Everybody gets antibodies. In 6 to 9 months, these antibodies decrease. Most of the people with the Indian diet, what we eat, have a decent immunity. And the supplements are not proven to enhance your immunity in any case. But keeping your vitamin D level optimum is very important. And if you're on any single dose vitamin, it is all right. But most of the people have diabetes or hypertension. They're anyway taking B12 supplementation as a routine practice. But taking vitamin C for many months is definitely not recommended. Vitamin C is passed down in urine. It's a water soluble vitamin. So, if it's only recommended as a routine medication where you're actually suffering the cold, then you have to take vitamin C. So zinc is also another issue. You should not take it very commonly for many months, because zinc uh, is a toxic element and the blood levels have to be monitored. So the new preparation which are coming is 50 milligram and they reach up to 100 milligram can cause toxicity. So if you are sticking to your old B complex, you're pretty okay with it. Keep the vitamin D levels optimum. And most of you, including me, will require a third booster dose. And that is going to do the trick, not taking the supplements. And that booster dose government may approve in 3 to 6 months, because in other countries, US and Europe, trials are underway. And this will be mostly like a yearly issue. Every year you're going to get a shot, or every 6 months you're going to get a shot. A lot of times they'll be mix and match. First Covaxin, second Covishield, something like that.
Thank you, doctor. Any other questions, please?
Hi, Divya. Can I ask the question?
Yes,
Sure.
please. Yes, Seema.
Yeah, so Dr. Shashidhar, it's the same message I had messaged you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
my husband, he has recovered, as I understand, from COVID. But what are the chances that, once the steroids stop, in that case, there is a, relapse of fever again, like since morning he has it. So that's the reason I was trying to get in touch with you. And
Mm-hmm.
what should we do in that case? And these were the tests which were suggested by our doctor.
Yeah. So the thing is, once you stop the steroids, everybody is going to get a rebound fever, and that's very, very common. Unless the steroid duration was more than like 20 days, uh, which is sometimes clear-cut overdue. If your steroid duration was like 5 to 7 days, there is a rebound fever here and there. Uh, Now
No,
the test,
it was for a longer time.
yeah, about 20 days, right? That's what you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, more than 20 days.
Okay. So fever coming with normal tests, normal blood test. You had just put a galactosmine test, which is like a fungal. That makes no use. But
Okay,
procalcitonin is for seeing a secondary bacterial infection.
okay.
That can be used, and other CRP, ESR, and other things. The question is, how are you going to treat it? And there should be a definitive approach. A 2 or 3 spikes need not be taken seriously, but high spikes like 101, 102, and the patient is again feeling sick, his appetite has gone back again, as in he was eating well and suddenly you see that the food intake has dramatically reduced, and his breathing and other problems are also, going back. Now that needs to be really evaluated. But just a spike here and there does not require too much of medication or restarting the steroids for sure. That I tend to use Nisonide here, which kind of helps to clear the residual virus in the body. Some people actually give ivermectin for 5 days at this point of time. Some people just wait and watch and it disappears. So it just depends on your treating doctor what it is. But some tests has to be done, like to see, 5 days back or 7 days back, whatever your blood reports are, is there a decreasing trend or an increasing trend? So that you should have to do.
Okay.
Thank you,
After the
doctor. One last question, please, for now.
But she was asking something.
I'm
Mrs.
sorry,
Seema,
I'm
you can
sorry,
ask.
Seema. Please continue.
yeah, so I just need 2-3 minutes after the session is over. Can you please reply on WhatsApp, doctor?
Uh, I do
What
not
you could do,
consult on the
Seema,
WhatsApp.
Seema, what
You
you
can
could
ask
do
me.
is,
I'll call you up, and don't ask me to write on the WhatsApp. I generally
That would be
make
great.
it
I'll
up
call
also.
or Seema, you can write into us at our,
I'll call
team
her up.
Fight
That's
Corona, and we can revert that also just in case. Yeah,
Sure, sure.
thank you. Any other question, please? Someone
Hi.
wanted to ask one.
Hi,
Yeah.
doctor. One question from my side. My
Yes,
wife
sir.
recently recovered from COVID, and one of the issues that she's facing is pain in her eyes, slightly above on the eyebrow side. If you see, first on the right side, then on the left hand side. Correct. So that's a recurring pain. She went to an eye specialist yesterday to check for that, and eyes were fairly clean, all okay. She does have a power which is -4.5. So is this something that we have to look out for and go for an ENT check? Is that recommended from that perspective? The thyroid, her sugar was absolutely in control. She never had sugar before. The steroids that were taken were mild, were around 8+8 for a few days, and then gradually reduced within 7-8 days overall. But do you think this may require some sort of investigation within ENT?
That's a very good question. Now, this is the, fever and headaches are the most common post-recovery symptoms. And
Yeah.
like I said, headache behind the eyeball is dangerous. Above the eye is pretty okay. What we know is after the COVID, people have hypersensitive nerves, as in there's something called a trigeminal neuralgia. The nerves of the face are very, very inflamed and they're hyperreactive. That's one reason. Second reason is actually their eye power changes. There's a condition called keratoconus, which is the power may actually increase because of the COVID or the steroids during the use of the corona infection, and that
Okay.
causes eye pain. But you already got it checked that the power has not changed, or did they check the power?
They checked the power; it was nearly same, so there wasn't
That's
a
good.
issue, the doctor said. Yeah.
Yeah. Third is if they had pre-existing sinusitis, it can worsen because your immunity has gone further, so it has slightly worsened. So I don't think she would ever get a black fungus,
Okay.
but there's a feedback loop, then somebody has to switch off it.
Yeah.
Yeah, doctor.
But she has to actually if she takes analgesics like painkillers for a few days and the problem persists, then she would definitely require a CT scan to say that her sinuses are all right, and
Okay.
maybe an examination of the nose.
Sure. Thank you, doctor.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So any questions further you have, you can write into us. You can write into the team Fight Corona Committee or Serving for Humanity. So we are right now at the end of the session. So thank you for your time. We will again have a share session with Dr. Shashidhar with another new topic. Thank you so much, doctor, for such an informative information. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So we will log out now. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.